Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Welcome back to another episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? This is part 13, and we finally have a new contestant that's worthy of joining our other flopped contestants that have each lost tens of millions of dollars or more. Since it's been a little over 2 months since our last Who Will Be the Biggest Flop episode that was released on September 3rd, let's do a recap of our current set of contestants who are all vying for the coveted title of Biggest Flop. And please remember to like this video and to press the red subscribe button to support this channel and the bell to receive notifications. Currently sitting in first place is an entry from Warner Bros. Discovery and DC Studios, that completely underperforming superhero movie The Flash that starred everyone's favorite wackadoodle actor Ezra Miller. The movie's final global gross box office ended at $270.6 million. And its estimated break-even point range was calculated by multiplying its highly bloated production budget of $300 million by 2.5 and 3.0 to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. And that calculation yields an estimated break-even point range of $750 million to $900 million, which means that the movie's final global gross box office loss ranges from between $479.4 million to $629.4 million. So when we divide that range by 2 to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, it yields a range of possible loss for Warner Bros. Discovery and DC Studios of $239.7 million to $314.7 million. Currently sitting in second place is Kathleen Kennedy's truly terrible entry from Disney and Lucasfilm, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, which starred the 81-year-old Harrison Ford. The movie's final global gross box office ended at $384 million, and its estimated break-even point range was calculated by multiplying its bloated production budget of $294.7 million by 2.5 and 3.0 to yield a range from $736.8 million to $884.1 million. This means that the movie lost somewhere in the range of $352.8 million to $500.1 million in global gross box office revenue. And when we divide that range by 2, we get a possible range of losses for Disney and Lucasfilm of $176.4 million to $250.1 million. Currently sitting in third place is Disney's very poorly timed remake Haunted Mansion, which starred Rosario Dawson and was directed by Justin Simeon. The movie's current global gross box office sits at $117.4 million, and its US theatrical run ended on November 2nd. Its estimated break-even point range was calculated by multiplying the movie's production budget of $157.8 million by 2.5 and 3.0 to yield a range from $394.5 million to $473.4 million. This means that the movie lost somewhere in the range of $277.1 million to $356 million in global gross box office revenue. And when we divide that range by 2, we get a possible range of losses for Disney of $138.6 million to $178 million. Currently sitting in fourth place is an entry from Paramount Pictures, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, which starred Tom Cruise. As I had talked about in a post-mortem video for this movie that I had released on October 1st, after its domestic theatrical run had ended, the movie's final global gross box office ended at $567.5 million. Its estimated break-even point range was calculated by multiplying the movie's production budget of $290 million by 2.5 and 3.0 to yield a range from $725 million to $870 million. This means that the movie lost somewhere in the range of $157.5 million to $302.5 million in global gross box office revenue. And when we divide that range by 2, we get a possible range of losses for Paramount Pictures of $78.8 million to $151.3 million. And to end this recap, the movie that's currently sitting in 5th place is an entry from Warner Bros. Discovery and DC Studios, which was another one of their underperforming superhero movies, Blue Beetle, starring Xolo Maridueña. The movie's current global gross box office sits at $129.3 million, and its US theatrical run also ended on November 2nd. And this movie deserves special recognition for being the lowest grossing movie globally for the entire DCEU franchise. Its estimated break-even point range was calculated by multiplying the movie's production budget of $120 million by 2.5 and 3.0 to yield a range from $300 million to $360 million. This means that the movie lost somewhere in the range of $170.7 million to $230.7 million in global gross box office revenue. And when we divide that range by 2, we get a range of losses for Warner Bros. Discovery and DC Studios of $85.4 million to $115.4 million. But we now finally have a new entry for who will be the biggest flop. So please give a warm welcome to our newest entry that comes from Disney and Marvel Studios, the very woke 33rd MCU movie entitled The Marvels, starring Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson. And this movie truly showed just how much it wants to unseat The Flash to become the biggest flop of 2023 by earning the lowest domestic opening weekend box office for any MCU movie of all time. Yes, that's right, the movie only earned $47 million domestically for its opening weekend box office, which is $8.4 million below the previous MCU record holder for having the lowest ever domestic opening weekend box office, 2008's The Incredible Hulk and its $55.4 million. So after 15 years, The Incredible Hulk can hold its head a little bit higher by no longer having the lowest domestic opening weekend box office for the entire MCU franchise. And that $47 million domestic opening weekend box office revenue is exactly what I said would happen yesterday in my previous video talking about how bad the movie's Friday box office was. And it's also well within the $35 million to $49 million predicted domestic opening weekend box office that Box Office Pro had reported on November 8th. But what about its international box office? With many more countries reporting their box office numbers today, the international opening weekend box office for The Marvels sits at $63.3 million, which means that the global gross opening weekend box office for the movie sits at $110.3 million, which is nearly $30 million lower than what Deadline had predicted back on November 7th. So with $47 million earned domestically and $110.3 million earned globally, the movie's current domestic share sits at 42.61%, which is actually well within one standard deviation of the MCU franchise's current average domestic share of 41.43%. I had started to think that the movie's domestic share could be much higher due to some reports suggesting that the movie's international box office was going to be a lot lower than what was reported today. But that wasn't the case, and knowing that its current domestic share is 42.61%, I can now provide updated projected final domestic and global gross box office values for the movie, which will be based on the MCU franchise's current average weekly drop of 37.68% and one standard deviation above and below for a range from 31.94% to 43.42%. And when we do that, the movie's final domestic box office may range from $108.2 million at the low end, $124.7 million at the mid-range, to $147 million at the upper end of the range. This is a slightly higher projected range than what I had projected in the video that I had released on November 9th, due to the movie's actual domestic opening weekend box office being slightly higher than the midpoint of the range predicted by Box Office Pro on November 8th. But by taking the movie's current domestic share into account, we can project that the movie's final global gross box office will likely range from $254 million at the low end, $292.7 million at the mid-range, and $345 million at the upper end. And these values are well within the range of final global gross box office revenue that I had projected on November 9th, as well as being a narrower range by 50%. Given that the movie has a production budget of $274.8 million, we can calculate an estimated break-even point range by multiplying that by 2.5 and 3.0, which yields values from $687 million to $824.4 million. And when we subtract the movie's range of possible final global gross box office values from the estimated break-even point range, we get a range of possible losses from $342 million to $570.4 million in global gross box office revenue. When we divide that range by 2, we get a possible range of losses for Disney and Marvel Studios from $171 million to $285.2 million. So while this isn't enough to unseat The Flash for first place, it's definitely enough to take second place behind The Flash and push everything else below it down by 1 position. Thus, The Flash remains in first place, The Marvels take second place, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction now sits in third place, Haunted Mansion now sits in fourth place, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 now sits in fifth place, and Blue Beetle now sits in sixth place. So be sure to tune in next week for another exciting episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.